another training session here at Decisions. My name is Kevin, and I will be walking you through a list management training on today inside of our brand new version 8. So let's go ahead and get started. Some learning objectives for today is that by the end of this training, users should understand what lists are inside of the tool and how they function, be able to locate all of the list management steps, understand how to set up and implement the covered steps that we will talk about on today, and be knowledgeable of all of the list management tools available. So as I mentioned, we're going to cover a few steps on today. Now, this is not the extensive list of all the different steps that we have available, but I will show you those and where they reside inside of the tool. But the ones that we will cover on today are add items to list, the remove item from list or by index, get item by index, and then finally our rule collection filter and collection filter steps. Now, before we dive into each one of those steps, I want to first start out by talking about what an actual array or list is here inside of Decisions. So we want to point out how computers understand the list. So as you see here, we have a list of numbers or ints, and which is displayed by the element value. So starting up here at the top and then going down to the bottom, we have a list of, as you see, 9 different elements. But if we were to count them up, naturally with our system of counting here in the US and everywhere for that matter, we would usually start with 1. But here, as you see, we're starting with 0. So that's very important when you're interacting with lists inside of the tool. You always want to start out the top of the list with 0 and not 1. Very important. And as you see here, it's split up by bytes, and then, as we mentioned, the array element at index. So instead of this being number 6, this would be number 5. Now on to a few of the steps that we're going to cover on today. The first one is add item or items to list. So these are 2 different steps inside of Decisions. We will cover the add item to list, but there is an additional step that is add items. So you can add multiple different ones to your list at the same time. And as you see here, we have a few different options here. So you can add to list position. So you have the option to add it to the end, which is quite natural, or you can do the reverse and add it to the beginning. So all of your newer items will be at the top of the list instead of the bottom. You have your list type where you can choose, in this case, we're choosing a string. And in our example on today, we're doing the same thing, but you do have the option to choose an integer, a decimal, or another type that you've already created inside of the tool. Our next one is remove item from list. Now the remove item from list does exactly that, where it's going to remove a specific item that you either put in as a constant or that you dynamically set from your flow, and then it takes in that list or the original list that has been set. So as you see the difference between these two, with the add item to the list, you definitely have to start out with a list, whether it's declared as a constant or in another portion, earlier portion of your flow, where you establish that list and then you're just adding to it. For this particular one, this assumes that you already have a list established and that you're going to remove an item. Here we have a get item by index. So as I mentioned in our first slide in regards to how computers understand lists, this will allow you to grab an item from that list by a specific index. So again, this can be set a couple of different ways, whether it's a constant, whether you're bringing it in from an earlier portion of your flow and you're declaring that particular number. As you see here, this has to be an integer, So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or so on and so forth in regards to the list. And then we're bringing in the list as well. And then same thing with remove item by list. We're doing the same thing, but instead of getting the item or declaring that item, we are going to remove it from the list, this time by the index. Then last but not least, we have our rule collection filter and collection filter steps. So of course, these are two different steps, but I want to combine them, talk about them at the same time because they're very similar with some very, well, one key difference, I would say, which is with the rule collection filter, you're going to have the option to collect or, I'm sorry, set a statement rule. So as you see here, you can declare where that information is coming from. In this case, it's an entity, and we can set our verb and then be able to dynamically set the value or once again bring it in from the flow. So here we're taking in a statement rule. We're using a statement rule on the step and declaring what we want to collect. In this case, we want all the words that contain chicken, all the values that contain chicken. We want to output those. And this, for a collection filter, key difference is, as you see, instead of just having one option to have a statement rule with the collection filter, we can have multiple rules if need be. We can set up even more logic to be evaluated through that process. And as you see, at the end, we have two different outcomes where you can include it in a collection or exclude it from the collection. So a little bit more dynamic in how you can set up your workflow for the collection filter. Now what we can do, let's jump over now to our studio tool. And we're going to take a look at a few of these steps. Now inside of our flow designer here, as you see, if you're not familiar with the flow designer, I always like to point this out, just to give you a highlight of the layout. You have your actions bar up here at the top. You have our steps toolbox over here to the left. Literally has over 3,000 pre-built steps inside of it. We can set input data, so we can call data inside of this flow from another flow or from external database. We can set different data types that we would like to bring in from here. We can also configure an integration right here at the top that will perform whatever function that we're looking to bring in from that API or that integration. Now, first, before we dive into this very simple flow, what I want to do is show you where all of these steps live. So down here in our data folder, we can scroll down here, and as you see, we have different options, but one of them is a list. And as you see here, we have several different several different steps that we can use in regards to lists. Some of these we'll be using today, some of these we will not. But as you see, there is a lot of different steps that you can use with the functionality and very similar setup that we will use on today for the steps that we have in our workflow. Now, if we go over inside of our flow itself, if I click on our first step, this is going to be our add item to list. As you see, as I mentioned before, we have the different option to either add to the beginning or add to the end. We can also choose our type, which will be string for today. And for our example, we're just using different sports, and we're going to add a sport to our list. And then also, we have an original list with different sports available in that list as well. Now, for our second step, we have our rule collection filter. And as I mentioned, for the rule collection filter, it differs from the collection filter step, where you actually can set up a flow or workflow, very similar to what you see here. A little bit more dynamic, but for this one, rule collection, we can actually set up a statement rule for this to evaluate. So for this particular one, we want to take all the entities that's coming inside of our rule collection, and we set our verb to contain, but we have different options for this verb. Like is empty, starts with, and then we can also set our value. Now in this case, I just want to return all of the entities that have ball in them. Very simple. Then for this particular step, our index of item or get index by item. As you see, we can set our list type, and then we can set our value. Maybe you want the value to come in from a database. Maybe you want the value to come in from a form. But in this case, I just set it dynamically on the step itself as a constant, and I want it to always give me the soccer value or the soccer index. And we can set the list. So in the outcomes of each one of these steps that have an output, you have your name. And you can set this name to be whatever your name you would like it to be, so that it's easier to find later on in your workflow. And in this case, it's new list. So we just chosen that list from our select from flow. And then it's going to output our item index. And on this form, well, all we're doing is we're going to show the different items that are in our list. And then we're going to choose an item to remove using our very simple drop down. From there, we're going to remove that. We're going to take that step, our remove item from list step, and the item that we chose from our form, we have selected current list. We're going to remove it from our original list, which was the new list. And then we're going to output a final list. And all we're doing is for this last subflow here is, since we're outputting a list of string, this is going to do exactly what it says, which is merge that list of string into one single string. And that way, we're going to output it on our last form here as a list of our final sports list. So very simple, but just to highlight the functionality and the capabilities of interacting with lists. So let's go ahead and debug this. So up here to the top, I'm going to click my debug button. If you're not familiar with the debugger, this is Decision's very own testing environment where we can go ahead and test our workflows, test our rules, just to make sure everything is functioning properly as we are building out our process. So as you see, our first 3 steps have run, and now we can choose our item to remove. So we have our list of items that we would like to, that we have as a part of our list at the current moment, and we can choose whatever item we want to remove. As you see, I chose golf, and now for our final list, it removes golf from that final sports list. Let's go ahead and dive into some of these steps and see exactly how it evaluates. So for this first step, we had football set as a constant. And then we had dynamically set our original list as well as constants. And all the step did was combine, added that football to the end, as we said on our, or set on this step. We want all the new items to be added to the end of the list. We can also add it to the beginning as well. Then for our second step, here's our input list coming from our add item to list step. And as you remember, for our rule collection, we wanted to only return the sports that had ball inside of them, or a ball a part of the value. So as you see here, now we have all the list of those particular sports with ball attached to them. For our index of item, we want to look at soccer. And as you remember now, when you're evaluating a index list, you always start at 0 and not 1. So if we start at 0, this would be 0. So our soccer should actually be 1. So let's check our output. And as you see, our item index is 1. And we saw the form where we chose our item that we wanted to remove from our sports list. In this case, as you see, now we have outputted golf because that is the sport that we chose to remove. Followed by that, we input golf into our remove item from list as the one that we wanted to remove from the original list here. And now this step outputs the new list of sports without golf. Then last but not least, this merge string list is actually a pre-built flow inside of decisions. So this is something that you can just search for inside of your steps toolbox and have available. Then as you see here, we just merged that list of strings, and we can also select our separator. So in this case, we just chose the separator to be a comma. And then finally, as you saw, we have our list of output with that separated values. So this will end our very simple list management demo on today. I hope that this was helpful. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions in regards to this at training@decisions.com, or if you're interested in the tool itself, please feel free to reach us at any of the below information with our email address or by phone. Hope that everyone has a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining.